an egg-shaped craft, alien revelations about reality and religion. In this episode, a Finnish man really found himself stuck between a rock and a hard place. When Tapani Kuningas started looking into Finland's so-called contact people, those who claim regular encounters with humanoids, he uncovered a curious pattern. These weren't just wild storytellers. They came from all walks of life: scientists, factory workers, everyday people. And what did they describe? You might have guessed it. Strange beings, telepathic messages, and in at least one case, a silent, egg-shaped craft hovering in the fields. That's right, an egg, sleek metallic white. Sound familiar? Because decades later, modern whistleblowers in the American Air Force are describing pretty much the same thing. Critics have been quick to call this misinformation. Skeptics say it's a classified, vacuum-pressured drone, next-gen tech designed for extreme maneuverability. Maybe it all comes down to being experimental military hardware. But you got to ask yourself, where does the inspiration come from when sightings off egg crafts date back decades? If today's tech is just catching up, what were people seeing long before it was even possible to build? Because why elliptically egg-like? Why design a craft, or a drone, in that shape? Aerodynamics, stealth, or something else entirely? Perhaps we really do need to consider non-human intelligence to explain it. Let's turn back the clock 55 years and dive into this fascinating account, as documented in UFOs in the Finnish Sky, by Tapani Kuningas. Toivo Kovanen, a repairman living in the rural municipality of Mikkeli, has been one of Finland's contactees and one of the few who has dared to speak openly about his experiences. He has never read a single UFO book, nor been particularly interested in such matters. He has never believed in anything supernatural. However, he has finally dared to talk openly about his contact with humanoids. What has caused such a change? At 41 years old, Toivo told Tapani Kuningas that he has received very concrete evidence of the humanoids' activities. At first, he had noticed some strange parapsychological phenomena, but later, those behind them had stepped forward, and the humanoids had revealed themselves. Last summer, in 1969, the first major incident happened. My wife had left for her night shift. I went outside. It was sometime between 11 and 12 in the evening. I was walking and looking around when I noticed a man standing on the corner. As I watched him, I saw a strange device on the edge of the field. Then I looked at the man again, and suddenly I recognized his face. He looked exactly like the Finnish comedian Matti Kusla. That's when it clicked. Aha, this must be some kind of hidden camera prank. I greeted him, and he greeted me in return. Later, they explained to me that the stranger had been given a familiar face so that I wouldn't be afraid. We talked a little bit, and then I asked, "How did you get that contraption up there since I didn't hear anything?" And he told me that even if all these houses were torn down, everyone would be sleeping so heavily that no one would notice a thing. I was just about to mention that there used to be a grand house there, practically a manor, when suddenly he was no longer standing in front of me. He had moved almost instantly over to the craft. It was as if a section of the egg-shaped ship had been cut away, creating an opening, and from within, beings emerged. They said, "Do you want to come along?" At that moment, shock hit me so hard my knees nearly gave out. I turned around and said, "No, go away," because I was sure I was about to be swept up into something massive, like getting caught in a whirlwind, spun out of control, and thrown straight into the unknown. And I wanted no part of it. Later, when I left, they told me they'd return, just in another way. Toivo said it happened in July, though he hadn't kept any kind of journal about it. As for the craft, he described it as almost like an egg. Smooth, rounded, and featureless, except for some raised areas, almost like bolt heads, about 3 centimeters wide, arranged in a precise, systematic pattern. He estimated it to be about 15 meters across and said he saw it from roughly 10 meters away. He didn't notice any kind of support structures, but a section on the side was missing. He assumed it was a sliding door. That's where the three figures appeared. Two of them were unfamiliar, but the third was the same one he had seen before. Then, in his own words, "So yeah, I was shaken, left the scene and felt very strange, wondering what on earth was going on." A couple of weeks later, on a Sunday, the strange humanoid appeared again, walking around in Toivo Kovanen's yard, just as it had the first time. I immediately said, "So is this where you keep showing up?" I thought, this time I will keep my composure. I will not be startled. I braced myself completely, determined not to flinch. I wasn't sure what kind of strange thing I was dealing with, but I figured it was one of the same devils that had been roaming around here. So I thought, now I'm going to see what you really are. He didn't touch me, but he came very close. He asked me, "Are you afraid?" I said, "I'm not afraid, but how is this possible?" He said that he couldn't explain it because I wouldn't understand. I asked if there were many of us. He said, "There are a few." I mostly wondered if there were others in Finland who had these encounters. Then he told me that I had been followed very actively since I was 17 years old. I thought, this must be something spiritual, so I asked if the Bible was true. He said, "Your Bible. It has some true aspects, but so much human interference has been mixed in that the good is hard to find." But he did say that there should be some fundamental truths in it. Well, that was the end of that encounter. Then came the third time. Somehow he explained that I wouldn't be coming back here once I was freed from this, that I would become one of them. I asked if this meant they would come to fight wars, but he didn't answer. Then he said that even they were just at an intermediate level, that there was something above them as well. At that point, our conversation ended. Then one winter, when my wife's nephew was visiting, the doorbell rang and I went outside. From about 4 meters above, a voice said that they would be coming to meet me, and they gave a specific date, but I had to be alone. So I told my wife that they wanted to talk again, so maybe she could go visit her family. But of course, she had her own say, and I couldn't force her to leave the house. Then, 2 days before they were supposed to come, my wife had such a severe asthma attack that she had to be taken to the hospital on Sunday morning. Then he came, and there in that chair, he was. We talked, but not much. He mainly just advised me on what I needed to do. Apparently, they'll give me information bit by bit, only as much as I can handle while still being able to go about my life. This they have particularly emphasized. There are 3 things I am not allowed to mention yet, not until I muster true courage. It sounds strange when they talk. I can see the man's lips moving, but it doesn't feel like the sound is coming in through my ears. It's as if, how should I put it? I perceive it with all my senses. I understand it in a strange way. I've thought about getting a piece of evidence from them, but I haven't asked because every time I meet them, somehow I don't feel like myself. I am myself. For example, I can hear everything, the sounds of cars outside, the radio, and other noises. But I don't quite feel bold enough to ask questions as a human would. They don't answer everything either. And for some things, they say they will come back to it later. Then he told me some strange things, including something about that little storage place, but I won't go into details. Apparently, there's a part of the human body that our doctors still don't fully understand. And there are supposedly 3 types of their devices, or what we would call a UFO. The same object can apparently be seen in different ways. Oh, one more thing. I asked him, "Isn't it possible to create these kinds of visions with drugs too?" I said, "Maybe someone secretly slipped me LSD." He responded, "You'll get definitive proof. Go to the McKaylee library, find that specific book, and on this or that page, it will be written in this way." I said, "I will do this." The following week, I went there and checked, and it was just as he had said. I also asked about smoking, whether it was a sin, and he just laughed. He said strongly that religious matters shouldn't be mixed into this, but they do have a connection, or so they claim. I asked if I was allowed to talk openly about my experiences, and he said, "You may tell, and you should tell, if you only dare. Seek contact with those who are genuinely interested in these matters." He also said this, "Even if people do not believe, if you have the courage, then tell." I said, "I have no position or status to lose, even if I speak." He said, "They know that you have little to lose. That's why many of these people remain silent, even though these things happen. By the way, they said that one among your people, whom you know by the name of Jesus, was a tough man. Not in those exact words, but that he was one of the great figures among humans. He also said that they had existed long before humans." When asked how he viewed life after these higher contacts, Kovanen said it had freed him in many ways. "It has freed me a lot. I do not feel fear. I do not get startled. Generally, if someone suddenly shouts loudly, a person may flinch. But I don't anymore. Fear and anxiety have disappeared, and I see something more in this life. I find it more important to develop oneself, perhaps through thinking, perhaps also through good company, if possible. Among other things, music, especially Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the Symphony of Fate. I felt a strong need to hear it." Looks like I'm connected to them now. I am not at all tired of this life, even though I have been promised that life will continue, in some other body. I have been shown completely ordinary everyday things as if beforehand. Among other things, a certain illness. The person sitting there showed it to me. I don't know where he got it from. It was just like, I asked, "Is it a bacillus or a bacterium?" He just smiled and said, "This was about to threaten you, but we made it disappear. They've given me the impression that some people here are worthy to go with them. But apparently this world, how did they put it, is the only place where humans have complete free will." I asked, "Don't you?" To this they said that we are bound by certain principles. I do not understand what restrains them. They answered, "We exist. We come from everywhere. From what I gather, they're operating on a whole other level." According to Kovanen, communication happens in ways other than physical contact. Quite often, he receives what he calls thought transmissions from the humanoids. These are short, maybe 10 to 15 seconds image flashes. The images appear on some light-colored surface. Before this, Kovanen receives a specific sound signal, which serves as a cue for the arrival of the images. The humanoids also told Kovanen that, because of them, many people have ended up in mental hospitals. They have at times made serious mistakes when establishing contact with humans. All right, let's wrap this up. A quiet rural town in Finland, a repairman with no interest in UFOs, and an egg-shaped craft that seemed to defy explanation. Toivo Kovanen's account might sound like a relic of the past, a strange story tucked away in an old book. But decades later, the similarities are striking, whether or not we choose to believe the whistleblowers. In a sensational revelation, Jake Barber, a former Air Force Special Operations Airman, told News Nation that he had worked in a classified unit tasked with recovering debris from what he believes were crashed unidentified flying objects. He described materials with no engine, no thermal signature, and, in his words, not human. His team immediately recognized they were dealing with something extraordinary and anomalous. Kovanen said he was left feeling almost giddy, fulfilled and happy. But more than what he saw, he was left with a message. They urged him to speak, even if people did not believe, to tell what he had seen, to seek out those who were willing to listen. Most remain silent, they said, even though these things happen. Many decades apart across continents, the same eerie details surface. By design or coincidence? Man-made or something else? If there's any truth to uncover, it might take a whistleblower to bring it to light. So the question remains, are these stories just echoes of imagination or messages from those who are in the know? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to subscribe, leave a like or comment. We also want to welcome our new members and supporters on Patreon. See you next week.